We'll begin episode 20 with a cruise ship known as the Bahama Queen leaving for the St. Thomas Islands. While boarding the cruise ship were Jim, the Holograms, and Rio, and wishing them goodbye were the Starlight Girls. But they're not alone. Eric and the Misfits had boarded the exact same cruise ship too. So now that both bands, along with Eric and Rio, had boarded the ship, and before the ship left, Ashley, however, of the Starlight Girls, is getting extremely jealous that they're not going to attend the concert the way it is planned. Chrissy, however, told Ashley that St. Thomas is so far away, and so the Bahama Queen cruise ship left the way as planned. So after Jim changed into Jerica, she decided to spend a few hours with Rio, knowing that Jim would be performing at the Banquet Hall a little bit later. So, just like what everybody would do, they were having fun, swimming, playing bingo, and having a good time. That was until Jerica told Rio that she's skipping a nap. So Jim, along with the holograms, met up with Captain Warren in the dining room, and that's when they all sat down to have a talk with each other. The mistress, meanwhile, were also there, and they were complaining about how the food was terrible and etc. So Captain Warren suggested to the holograms to perform to lift up the spirits a little bit for passengers alike, so they agreed. And what better way to do it was with the song Set Your Sails by the holograms. So after the performance was over, the audience cheered. After the holograms head off, they bump into Krabs, who told them that the captain's birthday was coming up, and the holograms were asked if they can yell out surprise for them in the lifeboat, so they agreed. But the holograms were not aware that Krebs was being paid by, you guessed it, the Misfits. And why is that? Because that's part of the plan. Or so they thought. That was until when the holograms yelled surprised, what they thought was the captain coming towards them. That's not the captain, those were the Misfits. And when the Misfits tried to lower the lifeboat, they were being caught in it, and now the Misfits are in the lifeboat the same way as the holograms did. And then suddenly, Stormer of the Misfits realized she couldn't swim, so it's up to Jim to save her. And changing into Jerga by the moment that Stormer woke up and saw Jerga right before her eyes. Well, good news, both the bands had made it to the deserted island up ahead. So good news for both bands, they made it to the deserted island when they swam ashore, and of course with the first aid kit. The first to wake up were Jim and the holograms, and they realized they're on the deserted island, but so were the Misfits. Well, anyway, Shayna was told by Jim to change into Jerrica quick after Jim confessed that she had just saved Stormer's life. Jerrica, that is. But there's a problem. Jim says that she couldn't change into Jerrica, and in this case, holograms are never going to solve this problem. So their only chance, the holograms, that is to bluff the Misfits. So when Pizzazz and the Misfits woke up, they wanted to know from Jim what are they planning about, what they're plotting for. Well, Jim was more than happy to answer that because she said that Jerica went to find if there's a rescue ship nearby that can take them off the island. So she decided that there's a way that the ship can be contacted. So when Roxy of the Misfits wants to know from Stormer what did Jerka need to save her life for after Stormer had pleaded her case that Jerka actually did that. So Stormer looks at Kimber and said, well, Jerka's your sister, right? Shouldn't you be worried? Kimber pleaded her case with Stormer to say that Jerka will be alright. So anyway, Jim told Pizzazz of the Mistress that since Jerka's a former Girl Scout, so she must have ran into the woods somehow. So that's when Pizzazz says, well, let's go save her. But Jim tells Pizzazz of the Mistress that it's much too dangerous, so all they need is some shelter and some ways to survive. So Jim suggested that they should get some food and shelter right away. Luckily for them, both bands that is, that they have a first aid kit, but all it has is some water, some bandages, a compass, but no food. So that's when Sheena suggested with some string they can catch some fish. Kimber and Asha worked for some provisions by picking fruit off the trees. Stormer went to get some fire for the wood. Roxy and Jim provided shelter, so that leaves Possessed with nothing to do at all. That was until later Kimber and Possessed caught some fish nearby. Well, now that the food rations and shelters is being set up, so all both bands did was to do what every person would do, go camping. And that's when both bands realized they weren't alone. So when both of the bands realized that there are wild boars nearby, Pizzazz suggested to throw some more wood into the fire. Good idea. And that's when she told the girls, the holograms that is, it said, listen up. It's going to take more than what we need because we go into a montage as the advice goes by the Misfits song itself. It takes a lot to survive. That is, of course, good advice. So both of the bands decide that they sleep through the rest of the night, hoping they'd be rescued in the morning. So by the time that morning arrived, when the holograms woke up, the Misfits were missing and still was the first aid kit. So when the holograms realized that the Misfits had wandered off and with the Earth Day kit, next thing you know, speaking of which, back with them, that's when Possess and of course Stormer and Roxy were busy looking for Jerrica. But instead they found some wild boars, the same boars that they were surrounded by the previous night. Things looked bad for the Misfits, and as they were screaming and tried to get away from the boars, Roxy and Possess made it to the tree, except for Stormer, of course. Back with the holograms, when they heard the Misfits scream, Jim knows what to do. She projected a holographic elephant to chase the boars away. Well, good news, Stormer's been saved thanks to Jim, and let's not forget Possess and Roxy who climbed off the tree. Well, Jim just told Possess and the Misfits that since it's too dangerous for them to wander off, from now on both of the bands decided to stick together, so that's what they did. Anyway, after going through the jungle for a little while, Stormer of the Misfits just brushed off the spider off the hand of Kimber's. Roxy, meanwhile, and the rest of the band tried to avoid mosquitoes, in which they did, and that's when both bands spotted a waterfall up ahead. So now that both of the bands had reached the waterfall, the holograms did what they know best, tried to freshen up a little. Well, long story short, after Stormer was scared to death by a snake, that's when the Misfits saw what looked like Jerrica in the middle of nowhere, and that's when the Misfits started chasing after her. So after both of the bands had climbed the mountain for a while, they saw a cabin up ahead, and they heard what looked like sound effects coming from inside, and it's a record player. After Possessor the Misfits shuts out the record player, that explains where the mysterious drumming comes from. But then both bands realized that they weren't alone because they just saw a stranger jumping through a window in the cabin. So after the stranger was knocked over by the Misfits and then removed his mask, he introduced himself as Angus Bean, and he's been a hermit ever since a loved one of his broke his heart. But that's about to change, however, because Angus started falling in love with Stormer of the Misfits. So after Angus laid his eyes on Stormer of the Misfits, he felt happy again. His joy has been renewed. He found hope. Anyway, Kimber and Jim were watching Stormer and Angus look out the window, and Jim was wondering what's going on with Rio, and he's getting really worried about her. To cheer up Jim and Kimmer and the rest of the group, good news for Agnes, he has a radio transmitter so that Jim can reach someone who would listen to pick them up. Both bands, that is. So as Jim tries to reach the Bahama Queen on the radio transmitter, Pizzazz kind of scoffs at her and then dismisses her. Until, many, many hours later, on the Bahama Queen's radio room, Rio, who heard Jim's transmission, has told the Bahama Queen to get to the island right away. So that's what it did. So when both of the bands saw that the Bahama Queen was coming to pick them up, the first person to see both bands together was Eric, and the next person was Rio. And he also saw Jerica, who was also there. And so everybody got off the island. That's when, on the way to the cruise ship, that's when Kimber makes her case with Stormer that they could be friends one day. In the meantime, Asha of the Holograms is busy arguing with Pizzazz of the Misfits to say who's taking credit for what. So then it's Kimber's turn to plead her case with Possess to say if it wasn't for Jim, you all would have been stuck on that island by now. Oh, and as for Jerica, she finally being nice with Rio. And that ends episode 20.